This video is sponsored by Craftsy. In today's video, I'm going to be tackling this little storage chest. Now, somebody gave this to me about 5 years ago, free of charge. They didn't want anything for it, they just wanted it to go to a good home. Unfortunately, it has been in storage for 5 years, and I'm only just now getting to it, but this damage had occurred prior to that. You can see we've got some pretty good veneer damage on the sides. The back is missing most of its veneer. There's a lot of ripples and cracks in the veneer on the top. The drawer needs a little bit of work, but the inside is actually in really good condition, with the exception of this extra knob for the drawer and the pieces of the one that's currently on the drawer. So at first glance, you might think this is a cedar chest because of the way it's not finished inside, but this is actually mahogany veneer. The outside is walnut veneer. Let's see what we can do with this. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. Chests like this are pretty common on Facebook Marketplace, especially the cedar ones, and unfortunately most of them are in a condition similar to this. But for me they are really fun to work on, especially with the beautiful veneers they used to use on these. I have a long road ahead with this one though. Now this piece is not amazing construction. The majority of this is put together with nails. There's no fancy joinery, but again, they do use a lot of beautiful veneers. Unfortunately, the back panel of veneer is completely gone, and the rest of the veneer has some issues, whether it's finish damage or some rippling. The side panel is going to be a little bit hard to get at because I can't take the trim off, so I'm going to have to figure that out. You can also see the nails go right through the outer veneer. Super strange construction, but it is what it is. I'm going to do my best to make this look nice. I'm going to get to this veneer repair in a little bit. I'm going to start by removing the finish. I'm going to be doing a combination of scraping and using a chemical stripper. One of the most common questions I get asked is why I use one and not the other in certain situations. For me, scraping is easier, it's faster, it's less messy, less smelly, no chemicals. And on a finish like this that is very frail and flaking, it's my preferred method. Keep in mind though that even though you get little piles like this, there's a lot of very fine dust that kicks up when you scrape this kind of old shellac finish. So you definitely want to be wearing some sort of mask or respirator. There are some considerations though when scraping, especially on waterfall furniture like this. This edge, if you're going a little too rough, sometimes you can catch that. These scratches against the grain you have to be careful with too, because if you're pulling down with the grain and you happen to catch it, you can tear the veneer, especially if it's lifting a bit from its substrate. You want to go super careful around the edges as well. Scraping isn't difficult, but it does take a little practice to get the hang of it and kind of finesse it. Now this mahogany veneer is in really good condition, which is shocking considering the outside of this piece. So I'm doing just a very, very light sanding just to kind of clean it up. So I'm doing 180 grit sanding here. You can see right in the middle of that horizontal scratch, it's still there. When sanding veneer, you have to be so careful. So what I always recommend is don't try to get every scratch out with your harshest grit. Do your first grit, your second grit, third grit, and by the time you get to your final grit, it should be out. If you go too deep with your first grit, you'll never get those scratch patterns out and it can be quite a mess. Generally, any edge where you have lifting veneer, if you go all the way along the edge, you're going to find more. So I'm going to repair all of that at the same time. But I want to show you this drawer bottom. They're pretty messy. There's some staining here. They're dipped in the middle. And it looks like someone may have tried to refinish this before because they've burned through the veneer with a sander, probably to try to get some of that staining out. I'm not going to fully replace the drawer bottoms, but I am going to fix them up a bit. This knob is really unique. It's made of a bunch of tiny pieces and it is so brittle. There's no saving this. So I am going to have to replace the hardware on the drawer. Going back to the construction of this again, I mentioned there was nothing really fancy about these, and these drawer bottoms are no exception. Normally the drawer bottoms are slid into slots on the sides of the drawers. Not in this case. They are just nailed to the bottom all the way around. So I need to carefully pry them up and pull these nails out to get the drawer bottoms off. I always like to clean up the drawer boxes themselves on these old pieces. It just looks so much nicer in the end. Now these are the drawer bottoms. I'm not going to be having this mahogany exposed. It's too rough for me, but I am going to cover it with new veneer. Now I don't have any mahogany veneer, so I'm going to have to use walnut on the top and I'm going to use some maple on the bottom. This is going to do something other than just make it look nicer. It's actually going to help stabilize it. You can see there's quite a big bend there. I'm actually going to add some water to the side opposite the bend and clamp these together, let them dry, and hopefully that will reduce some of this a little bit. And when I go to put the thin veneers on, it's going to go just like plywood. The veneer I put on is going to go perpendicular to what you see here. This is going to help give it structural strength, and I think it's going to save me from having to buy new drawer bottoms. Now, really, I could just paint the back of this. It's the back. No one's ever going to see it. Veneer is also really expensive. I don't know if you've ever bought veneer or bought it recently, but it's not cheap. But I am going to be replacing the veneer on the back panel. Now, I don't have any normal paper-backed walnut veneer, but I do have some of the 3M backed veneer. Now, just the sound of that probably makes some people cringe. It sounds like a cheap product. I've used this many times, and in situations like this, it's going to work out great. But before I get to that, I'm going to deal with some of the structural issues here on the bottom. A lot of the bottom was so loose I could literally pry it off with my fingers. And again, it's because it's basically attached with nails. There are a couple of glue blocks there, but the glue has failed, and there's actually quite minimal glue there to begin with. I'm going to clean it up and put it all back together. Now on the sides and front, I'm going to be using a chemical stripper. Sometimes when you have veneer that is in 15 different directions, like it is on the front, scraping can be a little bit tricky. And even once you get used to it, it's just more time consuming. So a stripper is going to make quick work of this old shellac. Now the wood on the trim and the leg assembly is not walnut, it's a very pale wood. Doesn't really matter what it is, it's going to have to be stained. I could do kind of a contrasty two-toned look, and it probably wouldn't be a bad idea considering the rest of this piece is all brown, but I think I'd like to keep it like it was with the dark base. This too is not in the best condition because the glue has failed in the joints, which you can see there's hardly any glue there at all. So I'm going to reattach these, shore them up again with some wood glue, put the nails back in, and then put it back onto the base. When you have mitered corners on older pieces like this and you put fresh glue in the joint, I like to just kind of sand around the edges. I don't need a crisp joint here, but the little bit of sawdust will mix with the glue and make it look like it's a better joint than it actually is. There was a split in this drawer, so I glued and clamped that as well. So this is the 3M backed walnut veneer that I'm using for the drawer bottoms. This will be on the top, and then this maple will be on the underside. Now you can see here how I'm doing it perpendicular to the grain that's already there. This is really important with veneer, and it's how it's going to help flatten this out and make it just a little bit stronger. This is literally how they make plywood and why it's such a great stable product. It's peel and stick and it adheres with pressure, so I'm just using a burnishing stick here and then trimming off any edges. This is the company that makes the veneer that I use. I do like this. I don't always buy adhesive backed veneer, but in situations like this, it's a great product to have around. What is nice too is that if you position it and it's just slightly off, you usually can peel it up once or twice without kind of sacrificing the adhesion and put it where you need it. Using something like a contact cement, you get one crack at it because as soon as those two pieces touch, you can't move it. So that's why I do like it in certain situations. There is one consideration, and that is that part of this has to slip into a small groove in that bar that separates the two halves of the drawer bottom. The extra veneer makes it so that it doesn't actually fit, so all I did was pull a strip off, and you can see now that it will slide into where it was. So here is the drawer bottom. I don't mind the walnut. I feel like the mahogany would have looked better, but I didn't have any, so I did what I could. Now, just before I get into these veneer repairs here, I want to say a quick word about today's sponsor. Craftsy is an online community and resource for all things creative. People who make, people who bake, crafters, DIY enthusiasts, and even more recently, some woodworking stuff. You can watch on your computer, you can watch on your cell phone like I'm doing here. Some classes and videos even have bonus content like this particular class here. You can actually download the plans for this shop cabinet, measurements, cut lists, and that comes included in your membership. The classes are broken down into really easy to follow lessons and are led by really accomplished and talented people. They're always adding new content, and there really is something for everyone here. I love dinner rolls and these look amazing, so I'm definitely going to have to try these this Christmas. You can search for a class to watch by video topic, by instructor if you're looking for someone in particular, by video length, so if you have a certain amount of time to spend, or just browse the new arrivals section until you see something that looks interesting. This stained glass quilt is beautiful. That's really cool. If Craftsy is something that you've been considering trying out, but you just weren't sure where to get started, the first 1,000 people to use my link in the description below will get a full year premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. This is for new members only. This is the perfect time of year to try something new. So back to the project at hand here. Now this veneer is super brittle in spots, and so now I need to find some patches for these areas on the back. Looking at a piece of veneer off an old piece, you can see there's a huge difference in thickness between new veneer and old veneer, but what's actually happening here is that the veneer, that very thin strip, is attached to a substrate. The two are one, basically. This can sometimes confuse beginners who think that the veneer is super thick, but it's actually just attached to a substrate. So I think I'm going to make my patch with this old piece. I'm going to remove the finish so I can check out the grain and the color. I think this is going to be close enough. Now I am going to peel the veneer off of the substrate because there's already a substrate here on the top. The first thing I'm going to do is change the shape of these broken pieces a little bit. And you can see it's so brittle, it just wants to keep breaking on me. It's easier to make a patch with a straight line than it is a crooked line in most cases, so that's why I'm making it a little bit wider. Eventually, it's finally time to glue these pieces down. Now I could use hide glue or something like that. I want a permanent bond here, so I'm just using a regular wood glue. Veneer repairs like this can take a while, but I always try to tell people to take your time. Don't try to rush through it, or you risk having to fix more damage. I'm using some painter's tape to apply downward pressure to this, and while that's setting up, I'm going to go ahead and put my patches in. Now, this part went a little bit sideways on me. Now, normally, I would have just popped the trim off the bottom and, with a glue syringe or spatula, kind of stuck some glue up underneath. But because that trim wasn't easily removable, I had no choice but to actually remove the veneer. And even heating it up, it was just coming off in flakes. It was so brittle. So I'm actually going to be replacing the veneer on that side with the same stuff that I used to make the patches. The grain on the side is vertical, so I'm obviously making sure that that's what my replacement will be. And just like the side, how it was in multiple sections, that's what I'm replacing it with. I just need to figure out what orientation looks the best to me. In this situation, I decided not to remove the veneer from its substrate like I did on the patched areas. It is going to make it a little bit thicker on this side, but once everything is said and done, it's not even going to be noticeable. Eventually, it's time to take the tape off all of the areas that were glued, clean up those spots a little bit, and now I can clean up these patched areas. You'll see there's still one small little hole that I didn't bother to put a piece of veneer in. I'm just going to use a little bit of wood filler there, and also around the patched areas. My patches were pretty tight, but the filler just kind of helps make it seamless. Now, there's these two water spots on the top here. This is something I almost never do. Normally with oxalic acid, you apply it to the entire surface. Because these stains are so irregular in shape, I'm actually just applying it to those. I'll let it dry, rinse it off, and then hopefully they'll be gone. Now I'm using that same 3M backed veneer that I used inside the drawers on the back here to replace that huge missing panel. I'm using cement and water-based stain to take care of all of the light wood. That's the leg assembly, the trim, and I'm going to rub a fair bit of it off. I want this to look a little bit aged. For the interior, I'm using some Odie's oil, universal oil mixed with a little bit of their safer solvent. This is going to give me a little bit of a thinner consistency. It feels kind of like a Danish oil in a way. Now, if you're wondering why I'm sealing the inside, remember this is not cedar, this is mahogany that they left unfinished to kind of mimic cedar. It doesn't have the same aromatic properties that cedar has, so there's really no point to it being unfinished. I think mahogany with Odie's oil is a beautiful, rich glow, and that's why I'm opting to seal the inside. There's no worry about the Odie's oil transferring to clothes. If you've been around my channel, you know that I use this stuff all the time. It gets applied, rubbed into the surface, left to sit for a little bit and bond with the wood fibers, and then all of the excess oil gets buffed off. All of it. And once it's cured, it's a lovely, durable, tung oil-based finish that I absolutely love and prefer to use wherever I'm able to. Once everything is completed, it's time to put the hinges back on. You remember I added veneer to the back, so I have to re-punch through into those original holes, which is actually pretty easy. Everything lines up. I did clean the hinges and screws up with a little rust bath. And I'm just adding a little bit of Flitz polish to that copper opener. I'm not trying to get all of the tarnish off, but most of it. Back to the handle situation. These were obviously a no-go. These are some wooden ones that I had. This one I think is a little too big. I do like the shape of this one. It kind of has that sort of Art Deco-ish vibe, but again, I find it just a little bit too big. Everything on this is brown, and I thought maybe a little pop of something brighter or shinier would be nice. So I have these brass colored holes that I think are going to be perfect and just add a little bit of bling to the front. Now we have to talk about the lock. This is not a Lane cedar chest, and for some reason people always equate the issue with locks with Lane specifically because they were the ones who started the recall on all of these. In some places, it is illegal to sell a chest with a lock that cannot be opened from the inside. You legally have to either remove the lock, replace it, or disable it. So all I'm doing is taking this top section out. It's kind of a drag because I love how the lids latch down, but it is a danger to children and pets if it locks and cannot be opened from the inside. So I'm adding a little patch of decorative veneer over that where the holes were just to kind of tidy it up. Once the glue had dried, I was able to trim the edges up to fit that perfectly and then added a little bit of Odie's oil there as well. And yeah, let's have a look back at what I started with. This piece was quite a mess. It had obviously a lot of water damage from over the years. Failing, flaky finish, alligatored in some spots, missing in some spots, damage to the bottom drawer, loose and unstable joints, a lot of rippled veneer, and the back panel was missing all of its veneer. I hope you enjoy this transformation. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like this sort of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this transformation. See you next time.